Hello and welcome. We're super excited to be welcoming Philip for our next presentation today, titled Tree Protection Bylaws, How Are They Working? Philip van Wassenaer, with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Sciences and a Master of Forest Conservation, is the Principal Consultant for Urban Forest Innovations, Inc., which specializes in the preservation, enhancement, and management of the urban forest using a research and science-based approach. He is an ISA Certified Arborist, an ASCA Registered Consulting Arborist, a current board member of the ASCA, a past president and director of the Ontario Urban Forest Council, a 2009 recipient of the ISA True Professionals of Arboriculture Award, and a 2022 recipient of the ISAO Maple Leaf Award. So we're excited to welcome Philip to our space today to speak about tree protection. Welcome.
Right, here we go. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I wanted to express my gratitude and happiness of being invited to be part of this very interesting virtual conference put on by Reforest London, the Solutions at Scale event. And I am here today to talk about tree protection bylaws and how are they working or how they work. And I think there was a quick introduction. My name is Philip van Wassenaer, and I'm the Principal Consultant at Urban Forest Innovations. So just to give you a quick outline of what I intend to try and cover very quickly in the next 30 minutes or so. Quick intro about urban forestry and benefits of trees, give a very general context quickly about bylaws, history of tree bylaws, specifically about the bylaws here in Ontario, some of the common themes that we have observed in many of these bylaws, touch on a couple of the challenges to implementation and enforcement of these bylaws, and then at the end, drawing from experience with these bylaws in, let's say, day-to-day work in our consultancy, and also through working with several municipalities now in developing their tree bylaws. Some of the strategies that we've drawn out that we think may be more effective for bylaws, especially if you don't have one and you're considering implementing one. So I always like to start many of my talks with this grand theme of urban forestry and the benefits of trees. And, you know, I think, as I hope everyone here knows, we don't grow trees in an urban environment for firewood or timber. We actually grow them for the benefits and the services that they provide to the people who live amongst those trees. And you know, there are increasingly a large number of benefits and services that are being recognized that these wonderful assets bring to us. But just a couple here. When we're thinking about building climate change resilience, we can look at things like the improvement of air quality, the microclimate effects, you know, the amazing effect of shading and cooling. On a hot sunny day, you walk under an extensive canopy, and sometimes it can be 5, maybe more degrees cooler underneath there. Increasingly, stormwater attenuation is a concern as we've kind of paved over all of our urban areas, and stormwater is flowing at a phenomenal rate. And we can look at things like energy conservation. And these are not exhaustive lists by any chance, but we can also then look at other benefits and services, things like noise reduction. One of my favorite subject, wildlife habitat. We know that trees, and particularly older trees, provide unique habitats for urban wildlife. And I think very importantly, this last point, the physical and psychological well-being. I think many of us can relate to taking a walk in the park amongst the trees and feeling better. And so this is not an exhaustive list, and I'm sure that many of you have your own particular benefits that you feel are important from the urban forest. And so we should be thinking about keeping it around. And so, you know, not only do these trees provide benefits, but you know, trees are uniquely an urban asset that grow in value over time. and they certainly increase their potential to deliver benefits. So this slide was originally put together in conjunction with Dr. Andy Kenny, who I had the pleasure of working extensively with in my career. And what it shows is increasing tree size or age along the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we see increasing leaf area, and we also see increasing urban forest benefits. But when you look at the graph, what you see is an exponential relationship. So when we get these large, tall statured trees with large leaf areas, we get exponentially more benefits. And so with regards to the talk today, tree protection bylaws are seeking often to try and protect these more mature trees, and this multitude of benefits that they provide is an excellent reason for trying to do so. So let's get into bylaws a bit. I will say I apologize to everyone. This presentation is uncharacteristically for me rather text rich, but it's a subject that needs, I think, lots of text examples just to bring you the information. So if we think about bylaws in general, in a municipal context, bylaws, which can be called codes or regulations, in the States they call them ordinances often, they're laws that have a local or, let's say, limited application. They are often passed by a governing council, by council, city councils, under the authority of a higher law. So in Ontario, we have something called the Municipal Act, which allows for municipalities to do all kinds of activities, but there's enabling legislation that allows for the passing of bylaws in municipalities. And they often regulate very specific items. So we're talking about trees, but they could be signage, they could be property standards, but they may also be something more broad, such as city zoning. City zoning is often codified in bylaws. And so focusing down to the topic at hand, tree protection bylaws. There has been an increasingly, let's say, attention towards looking at bylaws. My consultancy works extensively with municipalities in the realm of urban forest management planning, and I can tell you that pretty much each and every one of the 20-some projects we've done, there is at least some discussion around private bylaws. So these bylaws allow for the regulation of the injury, destruction, and/or in some cases, planting of trees. Many communities regulate the cutting of trees in woodlots. Not as many regulate individual trees on private properties, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. And many communities that don't have private tree bylaws still do have bylaws that regulate their own trees, so the municipal trees in streets and parks. And the graphic here on the left, the bottom of the slide, provided by my good friend and colleague, Margot Ersick. We are currently working together on revamping and revisiting the Guelph private tree bylaw. So we've been doing some research into sort of the current status, and we looked at not all of Ontario, but we looked at 30 municipalities that are considered as comparators for Guelph. And what we found is that 27 of those 30 have private woodland bylaws, so bylaws in woodlots for forest harvesting, etc. 25 out of the 30 have public tree bylaws, so protecting streets, parks, municipal trees. And a smaller number, only 19, have private or individual tree bylaws. So we can see that the bylaws for private trees are not as prevalent as protecting municipal assets or woodlots. And so the question might be, why have one or more tree bylaws? Why do municipalities look into putting these bylaws in place? And generally, a tree bylaw is a tool that the municipality can use to protect their tree canopy cover. I think many of us would be familiar with this metric of canopy cover. And we know that many municipalities are setting goals for their tree canopy cover. And inevitably, they are seeking to increase the canopy cover. One of the things that I've said religiously over all these years is, you know, if a community wants to increase its canopy cover, then we need to keep what we have now. And this is one of the places where these bylaws come into place. If we don't preserve what we have, then every day we're moving backwards, and it's quite an effort with you know, planting little tiny trees to actually move forward. So and these bylaws have you know, create the opportunity to educate people about trees. This is really a prevalent one because, you know, over time, when I look at the outcomes of bylaws and how effectively they actually protect trees, that could be another whole presentation for discussion. But certainly, we have the opportunity through these bylaws to educate people. We can, in many situations, deter or prevent the unnecessary removal of trees. We certainly can ensure that approved tree removals are done in accordance with the applicable rules. It can facilitate the tracking of removals and replacements, so we can see where we are losing or gaining back our urban forest. And importantly, I think, provide some sort of a legal basis for getting these replacements or compensation trees. I have another talk that I've delivered a few times. It's called The Myth of Tree Replacement, because I don't feel that these tiny little trees that we're planting back have much of a chance to replace you know, these majestic large trees when we lose them. But these bylaws at least provide an opportunity for a municipality to enforce the replanting and compensation for the loss of trees when it occurs. And so just to look at a little bit of the history, you know, bylaws, tree protection bylaws vary quite extensively across the country. In a previous iteration of this presentation, we looked more extensively at other provinces, but I've chosen to, with only half an hour, try and focus on Ontario here. And Ontario has the most private tree bylaws and among the most restrictive from the work that we have done in the past, looking at other places. And actually, only a few other provinces actually enable tree bylaws. Some provinces, they're just not allowed. I won't say where. And initially, these bylaws have always been a response to the loss of trees. So for example, here we have for these woodlot bylaws, they were initially developed when we started to see really a rapid loss of forest cover in southern Ontario. And we see a metric there, one county lost 73% of its woodlot area between 1961 and 1986. And almost all of that cover was on private lands because, you know, in southern Ontario, very little of it is crown forest. And where it's crown forest, ostensibly the crown has some more ability to protect it if they don't give logging licenses to remove it. But so these forest cover bylaws really were a reaction to the loss of forest. And I would say that I think the private tree bylaws are similarly reactive to that loss. I certainly know in the city of Toronto, which was one of the early adopters of private tree bylaws, their first bylaw was certainly in reaction to some rather onerous tree removal that happened within the city. And so for the woodlots, the response was to start to develop these bylaws that are enabled under what was called the Trees Act and is now called the Forestry Act. And these ones regulate more, let's say, logging or harvesting in woodlots and not individual trees. Initially, many of them provided sort of a minimum diameter that you could cut, but what it actually did is some of those diameter limits actually promoted people to take the big trees, what's called high grading. And so some of the bylaws still retain that, but most of them now look at things like good forestry practice, and the bylaws seek to enforce that good forestry practices are undertaken on in these private forests in southern Ontario. And as I mentioned, many Ontario jurisdictions, as we saw, also choose to regulate trees individual trees on private property. So people's backyards, their front yards, but not the municipal trees and not the parks trees. And as I think I mentioned a bit earlier, bylaws are enabled generally by the Municipal Act, and certainly tree cutting bylaws are enabled through this act. And you know, when we talk about the urban forest, these are the types of bylaws that are most often useful for urban foresters to protect their trees. And of course, arborists are quite involved in, let's say, implementation and dealing with these bylaws on a day-to-day basis, helping their clients along. And many of them have common elements, and some of them have some significant differences. So that's what we're going to explore a bit now. Some of the common elements that we've seen, we've kind of grouped them into, first of all, they define some sort of area where the bylaw is applicable. They have specific criteria for what needs to be protected. They all have exemptions, and many of them have a permitting and appeal process. So in the end, most of these tree protection bylaws, if you really narrow it down, they're a permitting process to enable the removal of the trees. And in some situations, they will allow for the prevention of those removals. And they also, in almost all cases, allow for the ability to levy fines or to put stop work orders in place. So as I mentioned, the first one, a defined area, any bylaw needs to be, fairly explicit about where it applies. And so I'm not going to read all of these examples, but there's a number of them here in front of you. For example, the first one in Richmond Hill, you need to obtain a permit before injuring or destroying any tree on private property. If we go further down the line, some of the ones from Western Canada, no person shall cut down a protected tree growing on urban land, rather broad. These bottom ones are actually more looking at the public spaces. So in Calgary, it's desirable to protect, preserve, and retain trees in public spaces owned or controlled by the city. So that would be an example of defining where let's say the street tree bylaw is applicable. If we look at some more specific examples from Ontario, once again, Margot helped to provide this because we've been working together, and I would say that's the most up-to-date project that we're working on now, where we have some information to share. So I also said that the bylaws need to qualify which trees are protected and which are excluded. So we've grouped them into 4 different areas here. The scope of what's regulated in the first one is all trees, irrespective of size, on specified private lands. So both Ajax and Whitby describe environmental and open space lands. All those trees are protected. In some communities, all trees above a specified diameter on specific private lands. So in Pickering, a tree needs to be at least 2.5 centimeters in diameter and also in a tree protection area. And here we have another example, Brantford, Kitchener, Guelph, at least 10 centimeters diameter on specific lands. We also have bylaws that look at all trees above a specific diameter on private lands. So Kingston, Mississauga, Oakville, they start at 15 centimeters or larger. The other one here, Brampton, and also the City of Toronto, consider protecting trees that are 30 centimeters diameter or larger. And diameter refers to diameter at breast height, here in Canada, 1.4 meters. And some of them combine different trees in different areas. So London, for example, all trees greater than 50 centimeters are protected, and trees of at least 10 centimeters diameter in what are called mapped tree protection areas. So there's 2 categories. And Ottawa, we worked with them on their urban forest management plan, and bylaws were certainly concerned there. And where they are now, subsequent to the UFMP, they did develop revisit their bylaws And now they look at all trees of at least 30 centimeters in the inner urban area and all trees of at least 50 centimeters in their suburban areas. So they have two different categories of applicability. Exemptions. Every bylaw really generally has some exemptions, and I have a long list here. I'm not going to read them all, but imminent hazards, emergency work, highly invasive species, trees on rooftops, oftentimes golf courses and cemeteries are exempt. I don't really like that exemption very much. I don't see why, but they are. And, you know, a few more here, trees removed under site plan or other development approval. So you can see there's a long list, and this is a place where some bylaws are the same, and some of these you would find in almost everyone, such as imminent hazards, and some of them are quite specific to the municipality's bylaw. As I mentioned, usually there's some sort of a permit process involved with injury or removal of protected trees. So for Toronto, for example, in the middle, any activity that can cause a tree of 30 centimeters or more in diameter to be injured or removed on private property is prohibited unless authorized with a permit. So this is what I said earlier. I think that's a good example of how the bylaws don't necessarily, I don't know any bylaw that says you shall not cut down any tree greater than 30 centimeters on your private property under any circumstances. Of course, there's always a tension because it's private property and it's being regulated. But this is an example where it does define that trees greater than 30 centimeters, you will have to have a permit to do that. So permits can increase the community's control over which trees are removed. And if there are costs associated with the permits, they can help offset the administrative costs. And we will get to costs as one of the challenges in a couple of minutes. And then lastly, generally there's permit conditions. So tree removals often can be contingent on certain other conditions. As I mentioned earlier, one of the, let's say, bonuses of bylaws, if they can't prevent the removal of trees, they certainly can ask for replacements or compensation. So the other thing is that I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, some of the bylaws also, apart from these actual size limits, etc., many of the bylaws actually state if the tree is a replacement tree. So if you've got a permit and you were required to replace trees, those new replacement trees are also protected under the bylaw. And so that's here, you know, maybe in the middle one, or the last one, let's use Mississauga example, replacement trees, no matter the size, cannot be injured or removed without a permit. So this concept that not only can we ask for trees to be replaced, but we also protect them once they're there through these bylaws. And I think in another, you know, we look at compensation as one of those things that is a benefit from having these bylaws. So we have all kinds of different formulas, and I, you know, can't spend too much time, but we can look at a few examples here. Toronto classically asks for a 3-to-1 replacement ratio. And if you cannot put those trees on the private property, there are provisions for cash in lieu. And in Toronto, it's $583 for a tree. So if you remove a tree and you don't want to replace trees, for the paltry sum of about, you know, $1,800, you can have that tree removed. You can give the city $1,800 and you're done. In London, I think they have a really nice approach. It's diameter-based ratio, or $350 a tree. So you can see this table here is from London. So for the distinctive trees, 50 centimeters is one, but as you go up to larger and larger trees, your number of replacement trees increases accordingly. In places like New Tecumseth, for example, and other places, use what's called an aggregate caliber approach. So if you are removing, let's say, 3 trees that are 50 centimeters diameter, you have in the aggregate 150 centimeters of diameter that needs to be replaced. Generally, the size of the replacement tree is prescribed as well, and so you have to make up that total amount of trees that were removed. And Oakville, last example, 1 tree for every 10 centimeters of DBH removed. I really like that one. And seeing I have 5.5 minutes left in my time, I'm going to just keep moving along. Really, as the last resort are these fines and stop work orders, and there's a few examples here. Maybe the Toronto one, which really gives some good numbers. So a person that's convicted in an offense under the bylaw, a minimum fine of 500 per tree to a maximum of 100,000. And there can be special fines of another 100,000 added on. So, these are big numbers. Do we see those numbers actually being collected very often? In my experience, no, but perhaps they may be a deterrent to people thinking about removing those trees. And so then we get to some of the limitations. I've spoken to this a little bit. In Ontario, private tree bylaws can't prevent tree removal when a site is subject to a formal development approval process. So, essentially, where the reason for that is our the structure of our enabling legislations here in Ontario. So the Planning Act supersedes the Municipal Act. Stands at a higher status, and the Municipal Act is what enables the bylaws. So if you're in a planning environment, then the act that governs that planning supersedes the act that might protect the trees. What we do know, and we have been recommending to many municipalities over the years, is that where their opportunity is maybe not through the bylaws, but through their planning process. And so if on conditions of approval, things like tree preservation and compensation are put into place, then you don't need the bylaw, or when the bylaw is suspended, so to speak, you still have some opportunity to look at managing these trees the way we would like. And so, as I mentioned, the superseding of the Municipal Act is why that happens. And so in the end, private tree bylaws focus on trees before, after, and outside of the development process. And I'm just going to move, we kind of put together, slide I thought was coming isn't, but so let's go to some of the challenges of implementation. I mean, the first one is just generally people's disdain for tree protection bylaws. So this is my property. I don't want you to tell me what I can do on my property. And when the discussions are happening in terms of implementation of these bylaws, what we really need to do is focus on the communal good of these trees rather than just their contribution to the private property. We have generally a lack of reporting of bylaw violations. In many places, the municipality relies on, the neighbor or someone observing it to report. And this is a big one, the lack of resources for the effective and comprehensive enforcement. There's not enough staff to undertake the enforcement for compliance and to go around and watch for this. And in many cases, a lack of council support to allow for the legal department to actually pursue these violators and seek those big fines that can be sought. So oftentimes, even with really good evidence, a really good case, the urban forestry department brings it up to council, and council says, oh no, I don't think we're going to pursue that. We're not going to put the legal department to go after that. So that leaves a big hole in the whole thing. We have the bylaw, we catch people red-handed, but nobody will pursue them. So and then this other challenge that when you're in development, it doesn't allow for the bylaws to really have a lot of power. And let's face it, I think many communities are concerned about the loss of trees through development, and they're seeking to regulate that through bylaws. So this loophole of not being enforceable during development process is a difficult one. And this was the slide that I was hoping to show you. So just quickly, if you have a tree on your property in one of these communities that has a bylaw and you're not doing any development, that tree is protected. If you have put forward a development application and you are now in the development process, that tree is no longer protected by a bylaw. But if you have progressive policies and that can constrain or put conditions on planning approval, you may have some protection, but that's the only way to do it. And after development, if the tree survives and thrives, it's now protected again by a bylaw. And if it doesn't, the only way you're going to have any recourse is if you had some sort of planning conditions or constraints on the development that pertain to trees. So that's the way we see it happening. Here's just quickly some photographs. I think everybody, if you're concerned about trees, don't like to see these types of these slides. Lots of things that are causing damage to trees, especially through construction and development. And these things are often difficult to regulate with bylaws. So I know I'm sliding slightly over time. A couple of things that we, think are really effective for bylaws. First of all, tailor it to your local needs and values. Don't just try and take a cookie cutter bylaw from somewhere else and put it into your community. Understand what the nature of the urban forest is, its extent and where it really is. If it's not extensively in private property, then a private bylaw may not help you very much. And what's the primary cause of canopy loss that you're looking at? Is it actually development or is it private homeowner removals? Again, if it's development, you may want to look hard at fighting for a better development process that can help protect trees rather than putting in a private tree bylaw. And are the resources actually available? If you can enforce it and administer the bylaw, maybe you should be spending your time and effort and money elsewhere. Again, maybe on developing better planning policy. And then some of the best practices just from the literature and from some of our experience, clarity is really important. Provide details about what's permitted, what's not, make it abundantly clear. Require arborist supervision during development and tree-related works, something near and dear to my heart. We do a ton of work providing reports for approvals, but I must say that it's actually rather rare that we actually get asked back to implement our recommendations. And this is a big hole and one that would be easily filled by simply the municipality should be saying if an arborist wrote a report for tree protection that was part of the approval, that arborist should be implementing and should be on site to oversee the compliance with the tree protection. And then, maybe start to look at making this transition. Instead of trying to protect with bylaws, look at getting better tree protection policies into your development process because they are enforceable and they will ensure that when a bylaw can't be in effect, that trees are better protected. Educate city staff, oftentimes planners, engineers, many of those other departments that have an effect on the urban forest don't recognize what's going on and they're not even aware of the effects of development on trees. And then this is an important one, try and provide recognition or incentives for people who are doing a good job and promote public awareness as always with everything with the urban forest. We need the public to be aware. If they are and they are concerned, they can help us with their votes at council and have the resources. If you don't have the resources, my recommendation would be don't start because a bylaw that's hollow doesn't get you anything and just creates problems and confusion. So thank you very kindly for your attention today. We want to see these wonderful trees like we see here protected. Regrettably, I won't be around to answer questions, but my contact information is here. Rachel can collect questions through the chat and convey them to me, and you can reach out to me directly. So thank you very much for your attention today. And once again, thanks to for the invitation to speak.